Buongiorno.
Good morning. We're very pleased to have this meeting, which is very important from a cultural standpoint. One of the big themes of this Rimini meeting in 2014 is education. We'll take an international approach to one of the most urgent problems to solve in a world like ours, where the presence of young people, as was said by journalist Cazzullo in Corriere della Sera today, are very important in relation to the university and employment. Talking about peripheries and outskirts of the earth, one of the risks is that the graduates become peripheral. They fail to follow their pathway as graduates. In 2013, last year, Enrico Moretti, a professor from Berkeley University, published a book on the new geography of work, where he said that development is linked to creativity and creativity is linked to the development of human capital. We used to think that the center, the core of development is the building industry, the infrastructures. We're not so used to thinking that the job market is a fundamental one, but it's linked to education. Technological innovation is very fast. Now technology becomes obsolescent within a period of 5 years, and so progress is based on education and human capital. Today, we are in an international setting, and we'll talk about a country like ours where things are changing, at least from the higher education point of view. In a recent report by the Foundation for Subsidiarity, titled Newly Graduated People and Employment, it was said that graduate students are lazy, but they're not. They're highly dynamic. They're ready to move from one region to the other, even from one country to the other. They are ready to make sacrifices at the beginning. And the more interactive they are during the degree course, the more they do internships or Erasmus programs, the more mobile they are on the job market. Now, if we have a new generation of young people ready to make sacrifices, what else do we need? We have a very interesting panel today. Maurizio Carvelli is the managing director of the CEUR Foundation, and he will cover what has been done to connect the university world and the labor market. Then Andrea Cammelli, the director of AlmaLaurea, will take the floor. As you know, AlmaLaurea is a consortium of many Italian universities. They collect data on the entire universe of graduates. He will describe to us what is happening at this level. AlmaLaurea also provides career services. And then we have Francisco Marmolejo, who is the World Bank's lead tertiary education specialist. He is a very authoritative person worldwide to tell us about what is happening in terms of the connection and link between the higher education system and the labor market. So we'll have an international perspective as well. I think after this meeting, we will know more about what is to be done, and we'll be in a position to deal with one of the peripheries of our world. Now, we'll start with Mr. Carvelli, then we'll have Mr. Cammelli and Mr. Marmolejo. Thank you very much for attending.
Good morning. As Mr. Vittadini just said, together with a number of friends, we've set up a foundation, CEUR, and the objective is to value merit. We want to basically establish the connection between the job market and the university, and these colleges are recognized by the ministry. The first method that we use within our colleges is for all students to be included in the community, where each student is then followed by director and tutors throughout their academic career up till the inclusion in the job market. And furthermore, we get in touch with all the ex-alumni that are there are some 3,000 of them. We want to put together training, education, and job opportunities and internships. Our students are basically, irrespective of their background, be that in engineering or other, are involved in the meetings on poetry, and those with a background in human studies, then they attend meetings on the scientific discoveries. So the red thread is indeed interdisciplinarity. So, as the very word university implies, we provide a universal background. We want to try and develop in our young students a personality which can establish links with the rest of the world, stimulating their curiosity. When these students approach the job market, they should have those features that all companies appreciate, i.e., not just being skilled workers and academically sound, but the capability to relate with reality and making choices. Many of the skills that are given to such students are going to be integrated with their professional experience. So this is what we perform at campus. Our students are in residence, and they are invited and urged to give the best they can. What I'd like to lay emphasis on is the origin of this foundation. I'd like to quote a number of examples of our work. The decisive word when we refer to the relationship between the university and the job market, based on my experience, lay with the word skill rather than merit. I understand actually there are very close connections between merit and skills, and I believe that that link should be further be laid emphasis on. So whenever we talk about skill and merit, we might be saying commonplaces because there are conferences, even laws and stories on the papers talking about that. But how can we make skills actually be visible and be stimulated? Because whenever we talk about that, we might be just paying lip service to that. What is actually skill? There's a writer giving a description of a skill as the center of gravity, the leading a man and a woman to occupy a place in the world for their unique way to relate with the rest of the world. So each of us have some talent, some skills. So this is a main feature in our character, is a personal skill. It is some kind of personal, again, characteristic that is specific to each one of us. It is perhaps the way we write words. It is the way our God has made our character. And skill is evident in the job that we perform. Whenever we make choices, we have to make our talent come out. So our main focus is for all students to identify their specific skills, their specific features. So there's a second important word which is connected to the one that we've just referred to, and that is the word ideal. We've been talking about ideals too little. Everybody talk about skills, but we also have to have ideals. Skills are not given to us just for us to look at ourselves in the mirror to say how good we are. We also have to have ideals. This is very important, and I have understood that. And I'd like now to quote the parable of the talents that again lays emphasis on that. As you know, you have the description of the owner, i.e. God, giving different talents to the different man. One is borrowing the money and the other one are investing the money. At the end, the owner comes back and complains about the non-investment of that money. So the owner, basically God, has given us some skills. And what is the meaning of this anecdote? The meaning is that, first of all, we have to make choices. At the beginning, we might wonder why we haven't been given the same skills. But this was not actually the problem, because we're not all equals. Even having just one skill is a lot, because that is something that we are given. It's a gift. It marks our character. This is something that we are given. And what is most important is that somebody is going to ask you how you've invested that money. So somebody has given me this character, this skill, this center of gravity, and then somebody at the end is going to question how I've used it. This is how we should look at the matter. So we have to invest our skills on our skills. The problem with the talent that had been buried in the ground is that he hasn't invested that, despite that talent being a little one. So not only do we have to acknowledge a talent as a gift, as something that has been given to us, we also have to understand how to use it. We have to use those skills, because somebody is going to ask how we've used it. And I believe that we have to do so based on ideals. Otherwise, skills just become a performance stress, and working becomes just something that prevails on us. And we just, in that case, if there is without any ideal, we are not using our skills for a good objective. When I choose the company I want to work for, when I choose the work I want to do, I have to use my skills at best with one ideal. So in our campuses, what we have closer to our heart is for each of our students to realize that they have a skill, a talent, and they also have to understand the ideal that they want to pursue. So they have to question their desire. They should never yield. They should never let go. They should persist in pursuing an ideal. And I'd like to quote an anecdote. I could actually quote quite a number, but I just like to confine myself to one. So to make you understand again, to take a message after this lecture. We're talking about the ends of the earth. I'm going to talk about the periphery of Catania in Sicily. This guy was a student at economics. Once he had completed his degree, he didn't know, because his father was a tax lawyer, within the families, some people tend to have their children follow on their steps. And the guy didn't know whether to follow on his father's steps. He didn't know exactly what to do. He actually wasn't very much attracted by being a tax lawyer as his father was. And he talked with other people, and he learned basically that he had to follow what he wanted, and that he also had to understand what he was lacking to penetrate the job market. So he didn't know foreign languages, so he went abroad. And many students actually do go abroad to learn languages. So this guy learned English. And while he was in London learning English, he remembers that there is somebody else that he had met while at the campus. He remembered that he had met a farmer or an entrepreneur with agriculture, and he was a passionate lover of his job. And this guy had taught about the love for Sicilian produce. So a student of economics, understand that in London there was a strong demand for Sicilian produce, so he talked with the entrepreneur that he had met, and he encourages him in understanding whether there was actually room for this business. So he studies all the rules on the certification on what was necessary to import produce from Sicily. Then he goes back to Italy and he met up with the entrepreneur that had first talked about agricultural produce. And then the university professor with whom he had studied international economics. And he recommends he attended a master course, and then he developed a company, and then he developed this. He didn't become a tax lawyer as the father wanted him to become, but he found out what he actually wanted and could do for himself. I could quote many other anecdotes and stories. The first condition is for a student meeting up with somebody else, more experienced, grown up, an adult, as we say. And the director of the school, again, was indeed what he needed. And then there is to be some kind of community. Well, the student establishes some kind of real relationship, not just a chat or a connection on the internet, but a real hands-on connection. And then you also have to have connection with the university world, with what is to be studied, and with people that already have developed some kind of experience in the market that appears to be appealing for the student. So links are to be established, experience are to be met firsthand, so as to understand one's own specific nature, one's own specific skills. When you meet up with a university professor, for example, that loves his subject, then you, as a student, might develop the same love. Or you meet up with a poet, with a manager, or men of business. Then again, you might see that model that you want to develop that might be a beacon, because that can actually be what you want to become. So any student should meet up with people that they want to imitate. And you have to have, again, a hands-on approach to what you like. This basically gives you also the background and the ideal that you want to pursue. I'd like now to close with a sentence by Don Giussani, who said, "Skills that are within us that were not did not develop by themselves. They are something that was given to us, something that has been developed by somebody else, and that requires ourselves to trigger them, to switch them on. So each skill has to be switched on for them to be active. That's why you need a community, so for a skill to be translated into a chance rather than a threat." Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm really very pleased to be here. I was invited on August the 5th to present AlmaLaurea. I'm going to tell you about the essential elements of AlmaLaurea. Basically, what we do is something very important. First of all, to allow the universities after 4 months to exactly know what happened to each degree course. And then the universities can also understand which percentage of graduates is employed after 1, 3, or 5 years from graduation. So how much they earn, what of the acquired competencies they use, what is their family background, etc. Then we make all the available information ready to be consulted by the companies, also translated into English. AlmaLaurea now relies on 2 million graduates. I'm very happy because Giorgio Vittadini joined AlmaLaurea with Milan Bicocca. They joined AlmaLaurea this year. The important thing I'd like to tell you about is that Galileo was insisting on the fact that the cardinals of the Holy See had to look inside the lenses, and Keynes said that there is nothing that a government hates more than being informed, and this was published on the Times in 1937. Luigi Einaudi says that you have to know to be able to make decisions. This is most important. You need to use all that was written according to Einaudi. AlmaLaurea now involves 65 universities, 80% of the graduates, and what we do is also work in Morocco, Tunisia, Armenia, and other countries. Let me remind you that Virgil, in one of his texts, said that the motto that said that there was a very important motto, which is still the motto of the London School of Economics. Now, there is a process which is ongoing. If we take the GDP and see what is the percentage accounted for by the expenditure for graduates on the GDP, you see that France spends much more, Germany even more, and Sweden quite a lot. When Vittadini
da 40 anni a 5 anni,
as you know, Mr. Vittadini knows very well, training highly specialized people who are unable to learn means that you don't have people ready to learn all the time on the labor market. Marta Nussbaum, who teaches at the University of Chicago, repeated this in a book which is published by Il Mulino. Let's see what happens. What is the expenditure for research and development that the companies have as a percentage of the GDP? Italy is quite at the bottom of this list. It's true both in terms of research and development. You know, the companies in Italy invest more than 1/3 of what Germany invests. 30% of the population enrolled at university is a population of 19-year-old students who enroll at university simply because they have a more favorable family background. Stendhal said that every genius born a female is lost to humanity, but we lose both males and females. What happens? The right to education does not exist at all. So all those that come from less favored families cannot attend higher education. Let's see what the European Commission did. The goal for 2020 is to have 40% of people who are graduates. The Italian government has revised this and said that we can at most have 26-27%. Let's look at those employed in highly specialized professions, managers, for example, professionals, lawmakers, top managers, intellectual professionals, scientific professionals, and highly specialized professionals. In Europe, all these figures are on the increase, even between 2007 and 2012. Let's see what happens in Italy, Spain, etc. In Italy, there is a drop. We start out from a very low level and end up being at an even lower level. Let's look at the situation of those that are employed with a qualification as managers. In Germany, it's 5% of them. In Italy, 28%. And last year, they used to be 37. Let's look at what happens with a degree or higher education qualification. You have 3 times as many graduates that are employed compared to those that don't have a degree. Let's see what happens in family-owned businesses. You see that family-owned businesses have a very high number, but in Italy, compared to all other European countries, managers are from the family, are people appointed from the family, and this creates many problems. Last year, we presented a very important factor concerning 2006. This is the graduate's employment condition. It's much lower in physics, biology, education areas. This is data from the OECD. Now, what does this tell us? That Italy has levels which are the same as in Germany, while in the US they have 26. The average of the OECD countries is 37. We have the situation that you can see on the slide. You see 25% work in human sciences, arts, etc. Germany is 31, the US 29, we have 22. I don't think this is a particularly important element, if you like, but I'm convinced that contrary to what you hear every day, that is that we have many more humanities schools, indeed this is not the case. And I think that the initial 3 years are fundamental, are essential to learn how to grow and to help people grow. You know, as Mr. Vittadini said, if you think of the graduates that will leave higher education in 6, 7 years, you know, you don't really know what the companies will need in 6, 7 years. What about the educational background of the parents? Up to 2004, 72% of the parents did not have a title. But now we have 74 for the first cycle, 69 for the single cycle, and those that do, for example, medicine and surgery, a specialty, have 54 as their parents' educational background. So there is also an educational a process of selection among the families. Let's look at what happens concerning the graduates' employment conditions according to the family's educational background. You see, there are 11 points of difference if you consider those that have parents with a university degree and those that just have the primary school level. There are some factors which indeed positively point to the possibility of finding a job. I'm referring to first cycle and single cycle students. You know, it's also important to study abroad. Those who do internships, for example, work much more, 14% more, and they work 9% more if they have a study experience abroad. I'm speaking of those that study abroad during the university course and those who do internships during the degree course. We have followed a regression model for calculating this. We consider the area group, the type of course, the educational background of the parents, the geographical area where the university is based, the marks, the regular attendance, the experience abroad, the internships, the fact that they're ready to move and continue studying. You know, with these elements, each university and each graduate or diploma holder, high school diploma holder, can know exactly what the situation is like. Let's look at the monthly wages, the monthly income. You see that it dropped in the period from 07 to 12. It dropped not just among first-level graduates, but also in single-cycle graduates and others as well, those that did 2 levels. What are the employment outcomes after 1, 3, and 5 years? You see, the unemployment rate has dropped very much. Everybody speaks of the fact that the graduates can't find a job. But you see that the unemployment rate here has increased by the unemployment rate has increased by 8%. And you see that there is a difference between the health-related professions and the humanities profession. The humanities professions get worse, have worse indicators. Let's look at the unemployment rate, which is mentioned every day by all newspapers. You see that the unemployment rate of those that have the intermediate school diploma only increases by 20 percentage points. You know, the diploma holder, the high school diploma holder, has an increase in the unemployment rate by 15%. Instead, among graduates, unemployment raises only by 6.5 percentage points. Between 85 and today, the Italian population dropped by 40%. Let's look at the differences between the north and the south and the men and women. You see that men and women are in very different conditions. And also between the north and the south, you see that in the north you have 87% employment, while in the south there is a different percentage, and the difference is 12 percentage points. If we look at the fact of being married or not, there is a difference of 7% among males and 20% among females. This is women without children. The difference is 7%, and the difference between women with children and men with children is 26%. Let's see the monthly income of these people. The difference is 293 euros. But at equal working conditions, the Difference is only 172 euros. Stendhal said that each genius-born woman is lost to humanity. I have a feeling today that also if you're born a man, you're lost to humanity. We have presented all these data to the World Bank in Washington, and this was a very important event. I think it's very important to remember that Saint Clare, in a letter sent to Agnes from Prague, wrote, "What you do has to be done in the proper way. Don't stop. Never stop." This is what she wrote. We are in a period of crisis, but we should not forget that even in periods of famine, farmers cut down on everything except for seeding, and we have to invest more on young people. Plutarch said, the young people are not vessels you have to fill, but torches you have to light up. And this is most important. We have to trust young people. We have to be confident that young people are the most important element to our country. Thank you very much.
Buongiorno. Buongiorno. La mia conoscenza della lingua italiana è limitata. So io parlerei. Hello?
Pronto.
Not working.
Pronto?
Okay. Buongiorno. La mia conoscenza della lingua italiana è limitata, so io parlerei inglese macaronico. To be more precise, I will speak in Spanglish, because I'm originally from Mexico. It is an honor to be this morning attending this conference. It is a great opportunity to have a better understanding of what are the key issues that are going on in the Italian case. I should confess to you that when I arrived this morning, I arrived a little bit earlier here, and I was a little bit concerned because there were only probably 3 or 4 people in the audience. And so I was wondering what is going on. It looks like our topic might not be of interest to people. So I recalled the history of a friend who was invited to give a lecture. And when he arrived, there was only one person to listen to his presentation. And so he wondered, what should I do? And he decided to deliver the lecture, despite the fact that there was only one attendee. And in the middle of the presentation, he couldn't resist. And then he stopped and asked the only attendee, why you are interested on my topic? And the only attendee responded to him, well, really, I'm not interested on your topic, but I was asked to close the door when you finish. So I'm very pleased that this morning there are many willing to close the door once we finish. What I will do this morning is that I will share... Grazie, grazie. What I will do this morning is that I will share with you some reflections of what we see from the World Bank happening in the interaction between university and the labor market. And I base these reflections on the privilege that personally I have of visiting many countries and learning in many universities and companies about what is happening. So I have been honored to be in more than 70 countries, always trying to observe what is going on. So let me start by talking a little bit about the context. And believe it or not, the context has nothing to do with the universities. We should exercise our capacity to see beyond the traditional, and that is what I will challenge all of you to do this morning. It is true that the world has changed dramatically in just a very small period of time. In fact, if I analyze my own personal experience in 50 years of understanding of the world, I can see that the world has changed a lot. Recently, I visited my parents' house in Mexico, and I found the Mappa Mundi, where we learned about the geography of the world when I was a kid, when I was a boy. And I was interesting to see that there are many countries that don't exist anymore. There are countries that didn't exist when I was a kid that now are in the map. And again, all of this has happened only in 50 years of life. So it is true that the world has changed, and that has significant implications for the world of universities and the work of world. So we live in a world which is increasingly interrelated. No longer what happens in one place has only local implications, but also implications in the rest of the world. When I was a kid, this is the radio that my parents had at home. And that was my only exposure to the world, because the newspaper arrived 5 days later, things were happening. So my exposure to the world was by listening to the radio at night and have a sense of what it was going on in the world. Well, today it is a completely different picture, as all of you know. We live in a world which is increasingly interconnected. What is happening right now in Rimini, it is being seen in any place in the world as we are speaking right now. So in summary, this is a new reality that we like it or not, we have to learn to use different glasses to understand it. If we don't think beyond the conventional, probably we will continue seeing just a very narrow picture of what are the challenges ahead of us, the challenges ahead in the university work, and the challenges ahead for the professionals of the future. I'm very pleased that this morning there are a good number of students here, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who will have to face this very intricated, this very complex world, which is very different to the world in which the previous generation, the generation of their teachers, was educated at. So I will challenge you to think out of the picture, out of the conventional. So for instance, who told you that the north is in the north and the south is in the south? All depends on where you are located to see the world. Look at these pictures of completely different ways to see the world. So for instance, I used to say and to think that my own hometown in Mexico was the capital of the world. Well, you know, let's be indulgent today with Rimini, Italy, and we will move the center of the world to Rimini. So now we are in the center of the world, right? But of course, everything is relative, because at the end of the day, we are just a very small speck of dust in the universe, as Marco Cáceres have indicated. So we need to always keep in mind that dimension when we are reflecting about the future, when we are reflecting about the future of universities. So in summary, the future is not something that it will happen. The future is not something that we can identify by just taking a look at the past. The future is what we do today. The future is what we build upon today in order to minimize the risk of uncertainty in the future. And of course, some thinkers believed that thinking about the future was kind of a useless exercise. Albert Einstein used to say, why bother about the future? No matter what, it will happen. But I remember when I was a kid, I remember reading a very scientific journal, which probably the older people here remember, which is Elecciones del Reader's Digest. And I found there a quotable quote that since I was a kid, stick in my mind, which is just to say that when I think about the future, I'm concerned about the present. Because sometimes we are so busy in our lives that we don't have a time to build that future that we want for the coming days. So in order to analyze the future and the future of the labor market, we need to see where we are right now. We need to extrapolate into the future, but also we need to take a look into the past. That's the only way we can have a better sense. And that's why quality of information, as AlmaLaurea does, is very important, because otherwise we based our information or our decisions just in speculation. So we can do that exercise even not only about work and universities, but also even about our own respective lives. So for instance, I'm trying to think about myself. This is me some years ago with more hair and less weight. 1976, I was 15 years old. So this is me today. And of course, it is difficult to know how I will be in the future. But recently, I found a very interesting app in one of these electronic devices that is able to extrapolate myself, not to the year 2025, but to the year 2040. And this is me in the year 2040. I should confess you that recently I was speaking with my wife, and then she looked at me, and then she stopped talking, and then she says, "Oh, Francisco, do you remember the picture that you showed the other day about the year 2040? And I said, yes. So she said, well, you're starting to look like that. So that's a problem. Anyways, let's talk a little bit about education. Now that we have this framework of trying to think out of the conventional, okay? Education is becoming central to policies and to the future of many countries. And education is no longer just a marginal thing. It is the central element. As Giorgio had indicated before, investment in human capital is becoming the distinctive feature of countries that are getting faster into this globalized economy. So it is true that we live in a new economy, which is global, which is highly competitive, I will say furiously competitive. We live in a world which is more and more based in technology, which is changing constantly, and more important, we live in an economy which is based in knowledge. Unfortunately, even though that's a nice picture, the other side of the picture is that, unfortunately today, there are significant growing inequities, inequalities in the world. And we, the ones which are privileged of having education, shouldn't forget about that. Because at the end of the day, the ones who didn't have that privilege had exactly the same right we had, but for whatever reasons didn't have the opportunities that we had. So we have a huge responsibility, not only being very flexible, smart professionals, but also socially responsible to the ones who didn't have the same privilege as we have. So the world has significant disparities. And that means that the economic model that we had developed in recent years didn't work well. And so take a look, for instance, at the case of two countries, Norway and Malawi. 3 days of salaries in Norway are equivalent to 1 year of salary in Malawi. That's a big problem. So in other words, we live completely different realities, and we better not forget about those, because again, we have a strong responsibility as individuals. And believe it or not, those realities which are so different of, again, a beautiful house and a very bad house, many times the only thing that separates them is just a wall, as you can see in this picture from Sao Paulo in Brazil. So as Dominique Moissy had identified, the problem of today in this interconnected world is that poor people know how rich people live, and rich people also know how poor people live, and they don't like each other's reality. And again, that explains many of the tensions that we see in today's society. So let's briefly talk again about the demographic factor. We are, as you know, overpopulated in the world. In fact, as you can see on this chart, population in the developed world will be shrinking by the year 2050, while the population in the developing world is going to be growing. So let's make a test of geography to all of you. Where do you think are those countries on the world map? Bangladesh, Mexico, Ethiopia, Brazil, Pakistan, Uganda, Nigeria. Well, we have an idea where they are, right? If we put a map there, probably we might have a little bit difficulty finding. Why I'm asking you this question? Well, because, believe it or not, this is Italy, by the way, in 1950. And by the year 2050, those countries that I ask you where they are, and which probably we don't know where they are going to be the countries where the largest share of the population of the world exists. And if we don't even know where they are, probably we don't have a sense of what are their dreams, aspirations, what they speak, what are their challenges in terms of education and university level, etc., etc. So one significant lesson that we have learned in today's world is that we cannot confine our university education just to the local dimension. We have to have a better sense of what is happening in the world. So in terms of migration, as you can see on this chart, there are some countries, and Italy is included among those, where the share of the older population is going to be so huge in future years in such a way that the current generation of professionals and the next generation of professionals will have a major responsibility to keep, if not to increase, the level of welfare in this country. Otherwise, overall conditions of welfare will continue diminishing. And for that matter, university education is critical in this knowledge-based society that Giorgio was making a reference to. I'm sure that you have seen this chart of the geographic demographic pyramid. In the case of Italy, right now the average age of the population is relatively older in comparison to other countries. But look at the year 2050. The largest share of the population in the country will be between 70 years old and 80 years old. And the big question is, who's going to be who's going to be paying for the pensions of you when you become of that age, especially the younger generation. That's why I like a lot the ad that I saw when I used to take my kids to the doctor. And that's why I try to treat them correctly. And that's why we have to do something in order to make sure that the next generation of university professionals will do well, because from a selfish attitude, they are the ones which are going to be paying our pensions when we retire. So another reality of today's world is that we live in a world in which a society is constantly moving. There are about 200 million people in the world who were born in one country and work in another country. So the pressure for talent in the near future will be brutal in the world. And I'm sure that Italy is going to be one of those countries which is going to be trying to find ways to attract that talent from other parts of the world, as other countries are doing right now very aggressively. And of course, it is evident that there will be higher levels of migration to developed countries, and of course, lower levels of migration to developing countries. So that's a world where the future professionals will have to work. The other element, as Professor Cammelli had indicated, which is very significant in today's world, is the international experience of the students. As he expressed in the case of Italy, 9% of the explanation of having a job has to do with having an international experience. And as you can see, more and more students in the world are going to be trying to experience part of their education by exposing themselves out of their own zone of comfort. And that will become, in this knowledge-based society, in this labor market-intensive society, a significant differentiator factor that we are observing in different parts of the world. That's why Kipling said many years that the best way to know about a country is by smelling the other country. So you cannot only watch that on the TV, but also you have to experience that. Also, we live in a world which is increasingly diverse. And there is a growth, sort of the growing consciousness about diversity in the world. is kind of a modern Babel Tower, as you know. And of course, university education is critical in making sure that students also acquire the capacity to develop higher levels of tolerance, to develop higher levels of understanding about not only their own culture, but also other cultures. And it is very well known that higher levels of education are equivalent to higher levels of tolerance and understanding. The lack of education consequently causes the creation of a lot of stereotypes about each other, a lot of ignorance about the rest of the world. And again, you know, for instance, this is the case in the United States with sort of making fun about the ignorance of the rest of the world. So in which, as you can see, I was born in a country well known for the tequila. So sorry, I will take some drink. It's not tequila. As probably you may know, the formula to drink tequila is the first is with water, the second is without water, and the third is like water. Okay, so it's just a joke. When you go to Mexico, you can experience that. Okay, so recently, I believe it or not, I even found something that just kind of make fun a little bit about some of the stereotypes that in Italy may exist also about the rest of the world. And of course, this is not true. I don't want to offend anybody, but I just found that on the internet. A very creative Italian probably made this. So this idea of living in a diverse world requires also to speak at least a second language. And I know that that is a big challenge in the case of Italy, because there is a lot of resistance to embrace themselves in speaking another language. And I believe that speaking another language, even with all the mistakes that I make, is the best way to think in a different language. And I will challenge all of you to think about the second language, not only in terms of English, as the lingua franca, but also in terms of other languages. Keep in mind that it is expected that in future years, other languages are going to be also very significant, such as Mandarin, Hindi, Spanish, Russian, etc., etc. So it is not only about one, but probably many languages. And that is a big challenge that my understanding is that still remains in the case of Italy. In terms of technology, a good professional of the future is the one that will have the greater capacity to use better the technology. Think about the fact that it took 74 years for 50 million houses in the world to have a telephone, and only 4 years to have access to the internet. I will make a test of generations and age here. How many of this audience remember about the slide rule? Okay, very good. The rest, I can assure you that are younger, because have no clue that when we were studying at the university, that were our calculators. Okay? So of course, our technology today is being seen as very obsolete. But think about the fact in the future that our today's technology your kids are going to be laughing when you tell them that you have, an iPad, an iPhone, and YouTube, and, all those fancy things. So technology is changing dramatically our life, and even is changing the way that we communicate. And again, that will have significant implications for the different ways that we will see the future. Think about the fact that today, only 20 families have the traffic to the internet that existed in the entire world just in 1995. And still with huge disparities in the world, as you can see in this map, where entire regions of the world just disappear. And again, that has changed so much that we don't even can imagine how is our life without an email address. So even now with this fancy Wi-Fi technology, right? Well, just think about the fact that as of next year, all the students in universities in the world will be digital natives. The rest of us have been migrants in digital technology. So that's why I really like this recent cartoon that was just published in England recently. So there is a very evident correlation between education, economic development, and social development. And knowledge represents a big difference between poverty and higher levels of revenues. Just talk about the individual benefits. The studies that the World Bank has conducted show that the average increase in revenues for a person once he or she studies is equivalent to, per year of school, is equivalent to 10% of additional revenues. But when you analyze the specific information about universities, you can observe there that the returns to the individual are much higher if he or she has university education. So the evidence is there, as it has also been indicated in the case of Italy by Professor Cammelli. But education is not only about money, it's about social benefits. And of course, there are significant benefits of education, as all of you know. It's the main factor for social mobility, but also education at the university level, and this is an opportunity for you to practice your Spanish. It is about better citizenship, more tolerance, more care of the environment, healthier lives, etc., etc. In other words, we need to change our perspectives about education in making sure that the ones who go to a university have, of course, the best technical education possible, scientific education possible, but more important, that also they have very humanistic awareness and understanding, much more general education, which of course means sacrificing a little bit of the scientific knowledge that most probably will be obsolete once they graduate, and also evolving and making sure that the ones who are in education have better, not only better knowledge, but also better attitudes. So the formula is simple. It's more and better education. Again, as I mentioned to you before, university education is still a privilege of a few. Look at this chart in the world, and you can find, of course, the highly developed countries having higher levels of education for the population, and usually the lower developed countries having lower levels of education. But the Italian case, it is really challenging. As Andrea had indicated, the number of Italians having university education is relatively low. You can see, for instance, the country that is being seen as an icon, the case of Korea, which is at the left. And in Korea, in just one generation, or two generations, I might say, people that now are between 55 and 64 years old, the average percentage of those who have a university education is only 10%, similar to Italy. But in that period of time, Koreans went from 10% to about 65%. And Italy went from 10% to about 20%. So even though the growth in Italy has been significant, the size of the challenge in comparison to countries such as Korea is huge. So in other words, the current stock and the future stock of talent for the case of Italy, as you can see on the green arrow, is relatively low. And that increases, of course, the challenge and the responsibility for the ones who benefit from education. So, and again, it is evident that there is a new generation of students today. It's what I call the generation of the media, because students of today see technology in a completely different way. They even think differently because we were trained sequentially, but today's students are multitask. They are doing many things at the same time. You can see just a screen of a computer of a student, and you may see how many things he or she is doing at the same time. And of course, they have many devices. That's true. But of course, there is a huge generational gap because, of course, in the culture of the copy-paste, there is limited time to further reflect and to further think. That's why I really like this chart, talking about the differences of education between our generation and today's world generation. So, but again, if we extrapolate that into the future, all the knowledge that exists today in the world will represent only 1% of the knowledge that a student will have access to at a university in the year 2050. So education will be much more about the capacity to analyze information rather than just memorize information as it happens today. So, of course, we like to see ourselves probably a little bit different, and let me finish with just some reflections about the labor market, believe it or not. There are perceived deficiencies in what employers tell about what universities are producing. As you can see in the case of the United States, but also you can see that in many countries. The main obstacle that companies refer to in terms of growing their business in many countries is about access to adequate skills. And there is a huge dissonance between what we believe in education. We educators used to say that the level of importance of a series of skills are the ones that you see on that line. But when you ask the employers about their level of satisfaction of what they see on the graduates of the universities, there is a gap between our desires and the realities. So it looks like the labor market, it is sort of acting differently to what we believe in universities. 72% of educators believe that what we are doing is great, but 58% of employers are very dissatisfied with what we are providing to them. So it is evident that there is a disconnect between the universities and the different external stakeholders, not only the employers, but also government, graduates of the universities, research institutions, community-based organizations, etc., etc. Also, there is a gap or a lack of connection between universities themselves and even inside the universities. I venture to tell you that probably in the case of Italy, as in other countries, it might be easier for a student to go out of the university than inside their own university to take courses from different schools because it is not part of their curriculum. So we need to change that because that's what the market is going to be demanding in the future. So universities, of course, are a little bit resistant to change. And we realize that changes at the national level are significant, but also that universities need to change. And even companies also need to change. So Peter Drucker years ago said that universities will disappear, that universities were obsolete. Probably he was wrong because universities still are today, but I think he was making the point about the need to change the way that we operate in universities, because that's where students will require something different. The ones criticizing universities say that the university is the only organization that holds a formal ceremony to get rid of the best of their clients. And of course, there are some institutions that are trying to find alternatives. You know, what we learned today about the contribution of college in the Fundación is a very interesting case of an institution which is trying to reduce that gap between what is needed and what universities are doing. There are some universities in some countries, there is one in particular in the United States, which is offering that if you don't find a job a year after you graduate, they will return the money to you. It is a very aggressive proposition, but that's what they are doing. There are others which are experiencing by providing more experiential training to the students. There are the ones, you know, there is one institution in which there is no curriculum. A curriculum is a contract being signed between the student and the professors, which is totally customized to the specific needs of the student. There are many institutions which are experiencing with internationalizing the curriculum in order to benefit the ones who don't have the opportunity to go abroad. There are institutions, of course, which are building the curriculum and evaluating the curriculum in conjunction with the companies. And there are institutions which are experimenting with more entrepreneurial preparation to the students. Those are good examples of institutions which are trying to address some of the deficiencies that I mentioned and that again will be required in the future year. And I know that decision makers in universities, of course, have a difficult time. That reminds me of the analogy of a rector of a university as having a similar job to the director of a cemetery. When the director of the cemetery says, I have thousands of people below me, but nobody listens to me. So, and the ones criticizing universities say that this is the case of a university in 1350, in which, by the way, you can find somebody which is sleeping here, and that the universities of today are like that. So that there has not been many changes. And they might be right, probably, or they might be wrong. And also that we in universities are very good at blaming others for the problems that we have. We used to complain that the students that arrive to our universities are very ill prepared. And then we can go to the lower levels and they will complain about the previous levels of education. And also that in universities we are very good in the art of ambiguity, which is expecting a change but keeping doing the same things every single day. So, of course, that means that, and I almost will finish, I have another 200 slides and I will finish, so don't worry. So we need to change the paradigm of the university education. And that requires greater involvement not only of the authorities and the professors, but more important, greater involvement of the students. The students must assume more their own teaching learning process, not as a passive individuals, but as as actors and actresses of their own learning experience. So we need universities that are more international, that's true, but at the same time, more locally connected and more socially responsible. We need universities more flexible, more innovative, more entrepreneur, less risk averse, and more collaborative, both inside and outside. And for students, there are some critical issues that they should keep in mind as they are studying. First of all, that they should learn to become highly adaptable to conditions that nobody can predict, which are going to be totally different in the future. Secondly, that they need to be prepared to change a profession. They need to venture to think that probably what they will do in the future will be something completely different to what they were trained for. The third is that they have to learn to speak at least a second language in order to think in another language. And finally, that they should recognize that they will live in a world which is increasingly regulated, interconnected, and interdependent. So the professionals of the future, the successful professionals of the future, will be the ones that have strong technical skills, but more important, strong soft skills, such as individuals being able to work in teams, individuals that are able to work in multicultural environments, individuals that are, have a very good sense of what is happening in the world, but at the same time that never forget where they are coming from and the commitment that they should have with their local community. Individuals that have the capacity, again, to speak at least a second language. Individuals that are able to use properly the technology. And more important, very significant, individuals that have acquired the curiosity, the capacity to keep learning for the rest of their lives. If they don't have that capacity, most probably they will become very soon obsolete professionals. But if they have that curiosity to keep learning, they will have that capacity to keep reinventing themselves in a highly changing environment in which they will be working in the future. So you can see there some of the professions of the future. Sorry that those are in English and Spanish, I'm sorry. But all of those professions, believe it or not, are not professions of the future, but those are professions of today, of individuals who had that capacity to combine different skills in such a kind of weird way, because that's where precisely the market is going to be demanding. In conclusion, we need to change the way that we see this connection between universities and the labor market. And I think the traditional view is that this is a good idea, but it's too complicated, and that it is marginal, and it's a priority that probably we should think about in the future. I would challenge all of you to think about this as a critical need. It is a means for a better education. It is something that it is a priority not for today or for tomorrow, but probably was a priority of yesterday. And of course, there is no magic formula. What it might work in your case might not work in other cases. What it might work in the Italian case might not be the best solution in other contexts. And of course, a last recommendation that I will make is that you remember that for every complex problem, there is always an answer which is clear and simple, but of course it is wrong, because the world is too complex just to come out with very simple solutions. In summary, the future, as I said today, is not what you guess from a crystal ball, is not what you extrapolate just from a statistical analysis. The future is what you do today. And that is the question that I would like to make the students which are present today. How you are building your better future. And the answer, you just have it. That's why I loved the motto that it is in the stairs of this building, Rimini. The future is for the capacity to explore imagination. Your capacity to imagine, to envision that future is what is going to make a big difference to you. Charles Darwin said many years ago that it is not the stronger of the species that survive, but the one that has greater capacity to change. And Paul Valéry also said that the trouble with our times is that the future is not what it used to be. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you very much.
In un'intervista sul sussidiario di un...
In an interview on Il Sussidiario, a missionary in Nigeria was asked why Boko Haram terrorists were attacking the students. This person answered, because knowing is an enemy of terrorism. Terrorism is afraid of people getting educated, because the more they get educated, the more they refuse fundamentalism. So the beautiful presentation by Mr. Marmolejo gave an international note to this meeting and confirmed this assumption and thesis. That is, today, knowing, investing in education and knowledge is the most important action we can do against poverty. Because instead of intervening, giving money in a blanket fashion. We have to provide every individual with the tools to take care of their own development. And as we saw, this ability to endow every person with these tools allow them to create their own development, because, as we heard, in a world which is digital, our young people are not sorry, there was an interruption. There is music in my ears.
Non si accontentano di...
Young people are not happy with preconditioned facts. No one watches television with the programs that are offered by the broadcasting stations. You create your own programs. You decide what you watch. So you have to provide individuals with the tools to build something. Also because the university of tomorrow is already an interactive one. We said it at the beginning. It is a university where you have to respond, interact. Let me finish in line with what Professor Marmolejo said. A friend of mine lives in LA in a company that does two things, rockets for NASA and the electric machine, which is most famous in the world. This genius built these two realities. My friend, an engineer who graduated in the Politecnico in Milan, told me that when they develop a project in this company, they don't go to the client immediately. First, the project has to be examined and reviewed by everybody within the company, even lower staff, because you need to be able to interact and respond to objections. You have to be able to change immediately, listening to the objections that are raised. So we have to invest in our country in a selective way, helping more people than institutions. This is our way to react to the crisis, and this is also the global way of reacting to the crisis. Thank you very much, Professor Marmolejo. We hope we can continue in cooperating with the World Bank, especially with your department, because we intend to learn more exactly the way we have learned this morning. Thank you.